If none of your LUTs are making your image look better, you might be using them for the wrong thing. Don't worry, this is something that I see all the time among newer colorists who are using LUTs for the first time, or might have gotten a LUT that they're really excited about trying on a piece of footage. And we're going to sort things out today simply by changing the way that we think about LUTs and the way that we implement them inside of DaVinci Resolve. Let's dive in and take a look. Okay, so I've got a timeline of a couple shots here, 3 shots that I haven't done much of anything at all with thus far. All I've done is what I always do at the beginning of my process. I've set up my overall color management. Here in this project, I'm doing that color management using nodes. I'm using Resolve's group feature to group these clips by camera and apply an input transform to get into my working space of DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. And then at the timeline level of my node graph, I'm applying an output transform to get out to my display color space. That's a really quick overview of how I've got my color management set up. If you want more detail on how I do that or why I do that, I've got dedicated videos on that topic. But for today, let's focus on what we would do from here. What needs to happen from here? Something that I see very often among newer colorists, or as I said, colorists who might have a new LUT that they're excited about trying out, is you'll get around this far into your process, and then you'll say, well, I know stuff needs to happen. This feels kind of over. This feels kind of under. This color cast doesn't feel quite right. You might not even be thinking about it that specifically, but you're just looking at the images and you can tell stuff needs to happen, right? What do you do at that point? Well, what you might be tempted to do is start flipping through LUTs and see if maybe this LUT can help or that LUT can help. And that's actually what I want to do here today. Now, before I do that, I want to emphasize something. If you are not using a well-built LUT that comes from a reliable source, there actually is no right or wrong way to use that LUT because it's never going to work for you. So you want to make sure that you are sourcing your LUTs from someplace reliable and that you are only using well-built LUTs when you're grading inside of Resolve. For that reason, I'm going to go with some LUTs that I can definitely vouch for because I made them. I'm going to look at my Voyager LUTs here, and we're going to take a look at some of the essentials. These are well-built LUTs designed to do exactly what I'm using them for inside of Resolve. So in theory, they should be able to help me with my images right now. Let's take a look and see if they can. Here on this image, I'm just going to start flipping through some different options. And I'm just going to narrate what I'm seeing here. What I'm seeing are a bunch of different reproductions that don't necessarily feel better, if that makes sense. They're just different. So thus far, I'm underwhelmed by the 7 or 8 different LUTs that I've auditioned. They don't really seem to be scratching the itch that I have when I look at this image right off the bat, okay? Let's go over to shot number 2 and try our luck again. Let's just flip through some different LUTs. This image feels dark, right? Felt dark before I started applying LUTs, feels dark as I'm applying LUTs and flipping through here. So none of these LUTs seem to really be helping me with my core issue, right? So no joy there either. Let's go over here to shot number 3. Start flipping through some of these on this shot. This shot has less issue in terms of its contrast and exposure, but the color balance doesn't feel quite right, does it? And as I flip through here, in some cases, things actually feel worse than they did before I even applied the LUT, don't they? It feels like it's exaggerating the problems that I'm seeing before this LUT is applied. So we're 0 for 3. I just got done saying these are well-built LUTs. I'm auditioning lots of different ones on all 3 of these shots, and I'm really not finding any success. So what gives? What's the problem with what I'm doing? The fundamental problem with what I'm doing is that I'm trying to get a LUT to perform a color grading task for me. And in fact, I'm actually using these LUTs in a sort of exact wrong way because the rules of making a well-built LUT, sort of the guidelines or the principles of designing a well-built LUT, are the same principles that are ensuring I'm not going to get what I need out of the LUT for the way I'm using it now. Let me show you what I mean. Here in shot number 2, any of these LUTs, no matter which ones I flip through, none of them seem to really be opening up the exposure of this image in the way that I want to see, that I know on some level I need to see, right? That's actually because one of the principles of designing a nice, versatile LUT is that it shouldn't move your middle exposure, okay? Similar thing here in shot number 3. I'm trying to sort of dial out this very fluorescent cast that I'm registering in this image that I don't really love, but none of these LUTs are really designed to rebalance the image. They might be designed to change the color palette around in some way, but none of them are designed to change the balance around because that would really go against the principles of designing a well-built look LUT. So the exact principles that went into building these LUTs are the things that are preventing them from doing what I'm expecting or what I exactly need in my images. But let me show you what we can do from here. Let me show you the solution. Let's go back here to shot number 1. And the fun thing is, we don't even need to get rid of the LUTs. You can leave the LUT turned on. This is not a conversation where I'm telling you, oh, you're using LUTs too early or too often or too liberally. It's not that at all. You simply need to complement their use with color grading. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to move this node off to the right, and we're going to do some color grading work upstream or to the left of this LUT. Essentially, we are going to change the image that we are feeding into this LUT, because even the best built LUT in the world is expecting you to feed a graded, balanced image through it. When you do, the LUT starts to perform really well. Until you do, the LUT cannot help, and it's really not going to give you very good results. Let me show you what I mean. Let's prepend a serial node, which means create a node off to the left of this node with my LUT in it. I'm going to hit Shift-S to do that. And the first thing that I see here that I want to address is the exposure in this image. Exposure here is hot to my eye. So one way to adjust exposure that I really like is to go to the HDR palette and go to your global wheel. And I'm just going to pull this in like so. I'm not really worried about clipping my blacks or about my contrast ratio right now. I'm just looking at getting my exposure kind of optimized. So if I look at the before and after, that's much better, right? I can now go over here to my primaries and start working on bringing up my lift, maybe dropping my gamma, and sort of shaping the overall tonality of this image a bit more. Something like that, okay? Now let's go off and then on. That's what we needed to see. That's the color grading that was missing from this shot. But here's what's interesting. Let's go back to our LUT now. Let's turn the LUT off. Now that I'm feeding a graded image into this LUT, how do you feel when I turn it off? On, off. I kind of miss it. I think now it's doing really nice things for my image, right? So I didn't even have to delete the LUT. No one had to slap your wrist and say, oh, you shouldn't be using your LUT. That's not the issue. You need to complement your use of that LUT with some good color grading. Once you do that, the LUT immediately starts to perform much better for us. Let's take a look at an example here in shot number 2. Shot number 2, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to prepend a serial node. I'm going to go to my HDR palette to adjust my exposure. That's the first thing that I'm typically thinking of when I'm looking at an image. How does the exposure feel? Is it under? Is it over? Is it just right? In this case, we don't feel over, we feel under, right? So I'm going to pick this up, being aware of the context. I'm not trying to turn this into like, a sunlit day. I'm just trying to make things a little bit more visible. So I'm going to open up my exposure here, like so. Now I'm going to go to my primaries and do the same kind of overall shaping that I was doing a moment ago, where I'm just kind of feeling my way through my lift, my gamma, and my gain to get to a better result, okay? And once again, if I go before and then after, we're moving in the right direction, right? And let's now go back over to our LUT node and turn it off, and then on. Once we've got these other pieces in place, I like what I'm seeing here. It's at least a look, it's at least a vibe. It might not be exactly what you want to do for this shot, but you can see the flavor that this LUT is giving because you are asking it to give you flavor as opposed to asking it to do your color grading for you. That we've now done upstream off to the left here, and we've got a fighting chance of meaningfully auditioning our LUT, or for that matter, saying, hey, you know what? This LUT doesn't feel quite right. Let's try a different one. Now, in the same way that we were observing that none of the LUTs really feel quite right, most of these LUTs now feel pretty decent, don't they? Because I'm feeding a graded image into them, and that's what's being applied, or rather the LUT is being applied to that graded image. Let's look at this final example that, as we observed, is really less about exposure and more about color balance. And we're going to do a similar type of thing, prepend a serial node, go over to our HDR palette, but now instead of trying to adjust exposure, I'm going to reach for the trackball here in my HDR global section. If you don't have a control surface, you can just grab this little middle bullseye here. And I'm going to move this kind of like southeast to try to get out of the greenish cast that I was seeing a moment ago. I'm going to go off and then on. And I want to point out something interesting here. In the same way that, remember when I observed a moment ago, like, gosh, when I turn this LUT on, I feel like some of what I don't like about that color balance is actually getting worse when I apply the LUT. The cool thing is that that knife cuts both ways. It looks worse when the image is out of balance, But when the image is in balance, it actually is easier to spot. It becomes more obvious. It looks better when you are doing the grade underneath the LUT. So as I've already mentioned, I'm actually a big believer in breaking out your LUTs early. I don't want to discourage you from doing that at all. Break out a look LUT, get it in place, and then do your grading underneath that, because it's going to allow you to have an experience like this one, where when you sort of drop your image into its sweet spot for overall balance, you'll feel it. It becomes really, really obvious. This is easier to perform a grade under than this. Does that make sense? Does that sound crazy? That's the way that I've always thought about this stuff, is that you want to have that look in place. Even though you're not asking the look to do your grading for you, you want that look to be the lens through which you do your grading, because it makes it easier, makes it more fun to do the color grading that we need to on any shot before a LUT can do its job. So again, if we go back over to shot number 2, or rather node number 2, and our before and after, that's our adjustment. And now that we're feeding this more balanced image into the LUT, the before and the after tells me, I miss that LUT. I like that LUT. I want to have it on. So I hope that helps clear up the way that I like to think about LUTs, when I like to break them out of my project, which LUTs I like to break out in my project, and the ways that we really want to avoid using LUTs, the way we want to avoid thinking about LUTs as a sort of first line of defense catch-all for doing our color grading for us. We got to show up. We got to do our color grading. And the last thing that I'll mention here is, I know when I was at this point in my color grading journey and I was sort of breaking out LUTs early and expecting them to do more of the color grading that we just got finished doing here today, part of the reason for that, if I'm honest with myself, is that I was feeling a little bit underconfident about my ability to do things like this. I was like, gosh, I just don't feel that confident in doing that. Or things like this. It's like, I just don't know if I have the chops to pull that off yet. If that's you, if that describes you, I want to encourage you to just walk right into that underconfidence or that concern that you're not going to be able to do it quite right, because that's how you're going to learn. And by the way, we're not doing brain surgery here. Nobody's going to die. You're not going to nail it your first time out. That's cool. But what is going to happen when you decide to get in there and start doing the color grading is you're actually going to get better at color grading a lot faster than you think. So I want to encourage you to kind of like search yourself. If this is you and you're resorting to LUTs and you're trying to get them to do more of your color grading than implementing your overall look, maybe it's because you're feeling a little bit underconfident in your ability to grade, and you need to set that aside and just go in there and get your reps, get your practice in, so that you can get better at color grading and color grade underneath really good LUTs that are going to give you a beautiful image.